Good morning. Welcome. Welcome to Mantra 108, where we are chanting the great 8-syllable Viṣṇu mantra that facilitates return of the individual person into bigger consciousness, greater consciousness, that consciousness that we talk about that is the inner light of awareness that connects us all to divine consciousness. So let's see, we're on our 7th day. This is the final day of our first week of our 21-day practice. So we've been talking about these different key concepts from the Yoga Sutras, from this book written by Nikolai Bachman. And so today we're going to talk about abhyasa. Abhyasa is a Sanskrit word that means diligent or focused practice, regular practice. We can't really develop any skill very well without regular, devoted, diligent practice. And that's what this word abhyasa means. So I'm going to read a little bit to you from Bachman's book. And I want to say that as I read these little passages to you, I skip around a little because I've read and highlighted the passages that I think will be most beneficial for us to hear on this day. So don't think that this is all that Nikolai Bachman is saying in any of these chapters, even though the chapters are a little short and pretty succinct. They're not as succinct as what I'm reading here. So buy this lovely book and read it. It's a wonderful support to any of our spiritual practices, I think. So abhyasa, diligent, focused practice. Abhyasa is a disciplined, persistent effort to remain focused. The focus can occur during physical exercise, such as our yogasana, our physical yoga practice, breath work, our pranayama, meditation, samyama, which is what we're doing here with our mantra meditation, or even the act of learning a musical instrument or driving a car. The sutras state that abhyasa is the effort required to maintain a focus, and it is to be done continuously over a long period of time with sincerity and care. Abhyasa involves a committed effort to maintain your chosen practice long enough to reap its rewards. Abhyasa, along with viveka, which we talked about yesterday, this idea of keen discernment, abhyasa along with viveka is a primary practice that is fundamental to all progress. Abhyasa can also apply to understanding another person. Focusing on that person regularly over time with sincerity and respect allows us to truly understand them better. Understanding others helps us to understand parts of ourselves. Each time we practice, an impression is made in our subconscious heart-mind. This is the chitta that we talked about a few days back. Over time, the abhyasa becomes a habit, and this habit is called samskara in Sanskrit. Over time, the abhyasa, this persistent practice, becomes a habit that eventually becomes stronger than our other habits that might not be quite so sustaining to us. So again, I'll read that. Over time, the abhyasa becomes a habit that eventually becomes stronger than other less helpful habits. As the momentum of this abhyasa strengthens, practicing becomes easier and the beneficial results accrue. It is important to stay on track and not give up, even when we want to. Practice makes perfect. If we can get ourselves into a good routine, practicing becomes habitual and thus easier. Whether we attend regular asana classes or set aside time every morning to sit quietly and meditate, perseverance will ensure some level of progress. Over time, our body, our breath, our heart, and our mind will become more clear, more refined, more pure, benefiting not only ourselves, but everyone around us as well. So it's wonderful that we're all showing up here for a daily practice, because that in itself is abhyasa. And so he always ends his chapters with a few little thoughts, 2 or 3 little thoughts. So I like all of these. Let me read them all to you this morning. The first is, ongoing, sincere, and effortful practice is the source of my strength and my progress. Consistent, focused practice will diminish distractions, reduce attachment to superficial matters, and deepen the connection to my divine inner self. And the last one, every time I practice, it empowers me and reinforces my positive direction. All very true. So once again, I can't see if you're with me. I don't know what's happened to my Facebook setting, and I don't know how to correct it. All of a sudden yesterday, I turned it on and I couldn't see that anyone was here with me. So it's the same thing today. I can't even see your comments if you say, hey, yes, I'm here. I noticed there were comments after I posted yesterday, but I couldn't see them as I usually do during our practice. So usually when you're saying sweet things to me before we start our mantra, and I'm saying things like, yes, good morning, Cindy, good morning, Corinne, good morning, Pierce and Holly. I can't see if you're here, so I'll just trust that you're here and we'll begin our practice. So go ahead and close down your eyes. I'm going to turn up the volume on our tempura. And we'll practice our abhyasa, our disciplined daily practice that brings us a little closer to connecting easily to our divine inner light, that divine inner light that resides in every one of us. So close your eyes. Let your shoulders drop away from your ears. Let your skin begin to soften, and let your muscles begin to soften. We'll take an inhale together to begin. Auṁ Namo Nārāyaṇāya. Auṁ Namo Nārāyaṇāya. Auṁ Namo Nārāyaṇāya. Auṁ Narayanaya. Auṁ Namo Nārayaṇāya. Auṁ Namo Nārayaṇāya. Auṁ Namo Nārayaṇāya. Auṁ Narayanaya. Auṁ Namo Nārayaṇāya. 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 Auṁ Namo Auṁ Namo Nārayaṇāya. 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 Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Please sit in the vibration of your sound. That brings us to the end of our practice today. If you were with me, which I can't see, please leave a comment to let me know that you were here and that I wasn't not connected somehow. And I'll continue to look at why my comments aren't showing up anymore. If you have any hints and suggestions for me, please let me know. All right. So today, abhyasa, that disciplined practice, think about that as it applies to all the different areas of your life that you'd like to move into